Hello and welcome to this latest World Built Environment Forum webinar series. My name is Andrew Knight and I lead our work on data and technology here at RICS. And today we're going to be discussing to AI or not to AI in reference to artificial intelligence, and to discuss new workflows and roles for reducing carbon in built assets. And this webinar is in partnership with Glodon. And I think the first thing I'd like to do is actually introduce each panelist. So Pierpaolo, perhaps you could join us and give us a brief introduction.
Hi, Andrew. Good morning to everybody, myself. And my name is Pierpaolo Franco. I'm Vice President at Glodon. I'm looking after the international market, in particular the European market. And we had, as Andrew said, the pleasure to collaborate with the RICS in preparing these reports and survey that I believe is the second one of the series dedicated to the QS's guys. And of course,
Thanks,
a pleasure.
It's good to have you on the call. And Loveland, perhaps you could join us as well and give us an introduction.
Hello everyone. My name is Lovely Nobi. I'm a senior lecturer in quantity surveying. I'm also a program leader at Northumbria University. And it's a pleasure to be here to talk about AI or not to AI. Thank you.
Thanks, Loveland. And last but not least, James.
Thanks, Andrew. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm James Garner. I'm the head of data and intelligence at Leeds, and really delighted to be here to discuss the findings of the report, and such an important topic at the moment with what's happening in cost management and quantity surveying. So really looking forward to it.
Thanks, James. Well, before we actually get into the discussion, we will have a brief run through a summary of some of the findings of the report. One of my colleagues will put the link to the full report in the chat, so you'll be able to download it. But let's really just spend a couple of minutes just going through really some of the high-level findings and high-level summaries of what this report told us about the sector. So it was around the role and importance of data and technology, in particularly QS and cost management practice. So next slide, please. And I guess the first thing I'd like to emphasize is the kind of depth and breadth in terms of the respondents. In this context, we had a really nice mix of firm size, organizational size, all the way from micro businesses, 1 to 10 employees, all the way up to those larger, more international global firms, as you can see, with greater than 1,000. So I think it's great that we've had a real cross-section here, because obviously, like so much of the built environment, many of the participants are small, medium-sized, and obviously then larger international firms. Next slide, please. And in a similar flavour, I'm really pleased that we had such a good response from right around the world. Great response from Asia Pacific, but also significant response from Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and right across EMEA, Middle East, Europe, and North America. And I guess the only area where we probably didn't get much feedback was from the kind of Caribbean and Latin America. But aside from that, really great coverage from a worldwide perspective, given the kind of issues that we're facing in every jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Now, one of the main questions we asked around was the kind of usage level from a project basis in terms of digital tools in this kind of quantity surveying and cost management practice area. And I guess, ironically, at the top, you see that Excel and other spreadsheets are available, clearly still does have an incredibly powerful role, for better or worse, in this kind of practice area. And then once again, if we go down that kind of hierarchy of where it's being mostly used in projects, we see that estimation, qualification software is being used, increasingly visualization, obviously BIM, but once again, BIM is not universally applied yet. Similarly with, a very well-established concept around common data environments, once again, not fully established. And then really if you go down that level, you see that the more perhaps more contemporary, newer technologies that are coming online have some degree of adoption, but clearly some way to go, whether that's drones and laser scanning, the various flavors of AI and computational tools, and indeed full functional digital twins, and then perhaps very much for the future, this sense of using blockchain, smart contracts around procurement and issues like that. Next slide, please. We also asked particularly around the input side. When you're looking at the data inputs into this process, how much is data and technology having a really positive impact? And once again here, I think it's probably an understandable set of metrics here around benchmarking and historical data having that key role. Obviously, the various metrics around market conditions, and interesting also the kind of contingency in terms of identifying risks. And then very much at the bottom, that kind of, I suppose, known unknowns, to use that phrase, where it's hard to kind of get inputs and get help from data and technology about those kind of unknown risks that may affect the project. And I think also interestingly, still not the highest one, but some focus now on modern methods of construction and indeed the role of data technology around the procurement strategy. So I think some interesting factors there coming up in importance. Next slide, please. And here we look at the adoption drivers, and apologies, this might be quite a small slide for those of you reading. And I say once again, the full link will be in the chat to download the full report. But I think if we look at these 6 drivers here, where there's some really powerful drivers for adoption, I think the common theme for me is all around standardization, whether it's ISO 19650 or ICMS or those various measurement standards, or indeed IFC that's so well used in that kind of BIM world in terms of design and geometry and attributes of the construction cycle, moving on obviously into occupational phase. And I think it's this real piece around both education and training in the bottom right, but also this sense of having common standards at various points in the process around various data sets to get that consistency and drive the usage of digital tools where we're talking the same language and we can exchange data in the same way. Next slide, please. And when we look at barriers, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Whenever we talk about data and technology, we come back to people, and really there, if we look at those, 2 top barriers there, it's about skills, it's about availability, it's about retaining staff. It's also, dare I say, around resistance to change. That change management issue of moving perhaps people away from, dare I say, Excel or other ways of working onto these more digital systems. So I think, as you can see, yes, there are the classic things coming up around silos, lack of standards, cost and financial issues, and indeed lack of data. But it's interesting that this is as much an issue around people in terms of skills, availability, retention, and indeed resistance perhaps to change. I think on a positive note, it's good to see that actually the kind of return on investment is seen as less of a barrier, that it would seem to be that people do realize that there is a really positive return to using digital tools. Next slide, please. Well, we're back to the meat and drink here, back to the panel itself, and I'd like to kick off really with our first question, actually to Pierpaolo, if I may. How would you say, how widespread is the adoption of AI and other digital tools in construction at the moment, Pierpaolo?
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for the question. Well, AI is something that is in the mouth of everybody, to be honest, but it's kind of a pinnacle at this moment of the digitalization. It's hard to think that it's very much adopted to the ones who are using still the spreadsheets, as you mentioned, for example. So we see from our standpoint as a platform, digital platform supplier, that when the digitalization is embraced and is adopted, supporting algorithm with artificial intelligence are part of the toolbox that you have, because you put together not the artificial intelligence as a standalone item of the digital toolbox that you have, but as a combined force with a platform that provide you BIM integration and support, potentially compliance with international standard, ISO. Therefore, it brings within a CDE if we have complex project. It goes with application of big data and empower these tools, because for example, can be supported in site management, can be supported in delivering discovery pattern, for example, in planning. And so for the QSs, for example, can be very supportive when we talk about a cash flow or a cost scheduling, that and also for cost benchmark, when we have to benchmark maybe project in different regions, in different geographic areas, with data that comes in mass number, and so we have big data at disposal. So these adoption vary a lot. I would say that digitalized organization inevitably benefit from artificial intelligence. Non-digitalized one are still on that curve of adoption that they cannot see really the benefit as a standalone one, in my view, with little exception, of course. AI is not just and only what we see with, Chat GPT, that it gives different type of information to different users. How we can apply the technology to a specific use in a specific field, as I made as in the example that I just gave to you.
Thanks, Paolo. James, I'd like to bring you in, if I may, given you're at the sharp end, as it were, at Leeds. How widespread is, what's your perception of how widespread AI and digital tools are at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think it depends whether you're looking at it in a structured way or an unstructured way. In an unstructured way, particularly for quantity surveyors, I think more and more people are embracing it because it's inherent and it's being built into a lot of kind of everyday tools now. I mean, you mentioned ChatGPT, but also even just the search engines are starting to utilize those tools. So if you say, are you utilizing AI, a lot of people are probably utilizing it without really knowing it in kind of everyday tools. It's starting to be built into Excel now. We're going to have the rollout of Copilot within the next few months. So I think in that kind of unstructured, just organic way, it is being adopted without people realizing it. But in that structured way, probably less so. I mean, it's people. There has to be more thought gone into how it's implemented. And there has to be a kind of joined up approach to it. So if you're looking at a platform or something that incorporates AI, that requires, like you say, it requires investment, it requires a strategy, and sometimes there's a bit of a lag between doing that and actually implementing it. And then you've got, as the report mentioned, that kind of cultural change, getting people to do things in a different way. So I think with a lot of things, and it's like a lot of things in life generally, where there's less resistance and things just organically happen, the adoption is much higher. So just kind of these things being built into tools without you even realizing, and just realizing that things are slightly easier, rather than making a big deal out of the fact that there's a new AI tool or new AI package that requires new training and new ways of doing things. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. In reality, I think most people are probably using AI, but if you ask them, they probably might not even realize that they are.
I mean, almost as a side question, it is interesting, James, isn't it, that it's become so pervasive now that people are using it almost without realizing. I mean, do you think that's a risk? I mean, clearly it's an opportunity in terms of the power and the benefits we get, but do you think there's a risk from a practitioner perspective that people are consuming AI almost without realizing?
Yeah, there is, and something that we try to address with looking at AI policies and stuff around, you can't just trust the outputs. And at the moment, AI is amazing, and I'm a big proponent of it, but it doesn't replace a skilled professional's judgment. It's a tool to help you. So the risk is people using the outputs of these AI tools and verbatim without really checking it. So, and I think that's down to organizations, it's down to people like the RICS to make it clear that actually at the moment these things are tools. Now when we get to the next round of AI, because these things go in cycles, right, that they may be a true artificial intelligence, i.e. you can really trust the outputs, but at the moment I don't think you can you know, any practitioner listening to this, whether you're a QS or project manager, you can't, I wouldn't trust the outputs willy-nilly. You still got to use your professional judgment to go with it.
No, that's a key point. Before I move on to the next question and ask you something, Loveline, just really a comment to the whole audience here. We do want to keep this interactive as possible, so I don't want to be the only person asking the question. So please do put your questions into the chat to bring this conversation to life. You should be able to submit questions at any time on your questions box on the screen, and we'll pick up as many as we can as we go through the session. Moving to you, Loveline. In terms of actually how they're being used, how do you see AI and these other digital tools actually being used in construction at the moment? You know, what are the use cases? Where are people using this for particular processes?
Well, when we're looking at AI, speaking of AI, there are basically 4 sections we've been experiencing uses of this tool, particularly around automation, repetitive processes. So, for example, BIM has created a platform where you could see a lot of QSs and project managers begin to use different AI-driven softwares for estimating purposes, running project planning and all of that. So where they have repetitive processes within the QS practice profession, there is a lot of AI-powered softwares that we're beginning to use along that line. And that's with automation. We also have generative designs. So it could also be generative in the sense that it's looking forward more into creating new products. And we could have QSs working alongside with designers, particularly during cost planning processes, and feeding in information that support feasibility studies. Like James mentioned earlier, there are tools available that are being used within the pre-planning phases, particularly in the cost planning process, to support decision making, and that is enabling, you know, more optimized designs, cost-efficient designs, value-driven designs to be generated, and those cost input or criteria or parameters within those designs, or to create those designs, make it a lot helpful, particularly when they're all AI powered. Another aspect is predictive, particularly during facility asset management process or phase, where we're relying more around facility management. In the past, we relied solely on preventive maintenance, but it's moved one step ahead to predictive maintenance. So tools around how operations are happening, how components need to be planned, replaced, reused, all of that. They're beginning to have more AI-powered softwares and processes to support that happening, and QSs are in a way working strongly with project managers using some of these tools to drive predictive maintenance. And then, of course, we've got visualization aspect of it, particularly within the roles of as QS professionals or project managers. Visualization is very, very important. And then AI-powered tools are enabling us, you know, to be able to make that more of a reality. Drones have come in, AI-powered drones have come in, and all of those information, you know, collected can then be used to make more informed decision about cost of health and safety, you know, within project environments. And these are just a little bit around some of the areas where we have got AI currently being used within construction at the moment. It's still limited, but in due course, as it keeps evolving, there will be, you know, larger room for its application and implementation.
And do you see, Loveline, do you see a better kind of, I know in the UK we call them soft landings, but do you see a better kind of use of digital technology to move from the construction phase into the occupational phase?
Yes. That helps a lot, because it's not just about that. There's so much data being generated throughout, from design all the way through construction, and the gap is always, how do we utilize this data during the facility management, you know, reuse, deconstruction phases? And with AI, we can gather those data, we can manage that data, and then we can predict scenarios of how best to use that data and the management of assets during the facility management period of many of the constructed facilities. So, for example, in essence of there is more research actually going into implementation of automated disassembly, which of course is AI. With AI powering that process, it makes it a lot easier when you already have a constructed asset and it's getting towards the end of life phase. AI can power looking at its current state. How best do we disassemble, all of that? That will impact on the management sequence and process. That will impact on costing. That will impact on time management as well. Impact on health and safety, and all these have cost implications. And of course, promoting value. So yes, there is a lot that AI has to offer, particularly after construction, which of course, looking from construction all the way down to deconstruction of that facility, it's a long lifespan compared to when you're planning and just putting that construction in place. So yes, it will.
Thanks. I'd like to move to you, James, if I may, on a question that's always very close to my heart, because not only of the report that we've looked at this morning and looking at, but also more generally with a lot of the tech firms I work with, is this whole area of drivers and barriers for not just AI, but digitalisation in general. And I'm always intrigued by that mix of technical issues, but also those people issues as well that came out so strongly in the report. What are your thoughts on drivers and barriers and how we overcome them?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I'm not surprised with the findings. My own experience has been that it's the culture and the people side is kind of tougher than the tech. The entry barrier in terms of technology, and your report highlights it. That's less of a concern now as the price point comes down. That's no longer the barrier. It's with these low-code tools and AI being built into a lot of software. It's now the adoption. And if anyone's familiar with something called the Gartner hype cycle, it goes through this cycle of a development process. AI right now is what is firmly in what's called the peak of inflated expectation, if you're familiar with that. But what follows the peak of inflated expectation is what's called the trough of disillusionment, where you think AI is going to solve all of our problems, but actually the realization then comes down the road, which is it doesn't do that. And we've got to be prepared for that, because I think most people on this call are clear that AI is a tool. It's not going to solve everything. And that's one of the barriers, in that when we get over the hype cycle, as it were, we have to be prepared to say, well, actually, the AI is still amazing. And when you combine it with other technologies in terms of things like Web3 technology, so things like the metaverse, so bringing in digital twins, things like blockchain technology, and then coming down the road is things like quantum computing, all those things together are going to have a significant impact on the way we do things. But there's going to be a journey. So at the moment we're at this hype cycle, and the reason I mention that is because even though there's lots of very, very clear drivers in terms of AI adoption, things like biggest one being improved efficiency and productivity, just getting rid of kind of the grunt work and the automating tasks, so we can use our time more valuably. There's also the fact that we've got more access to data. There's sensors around building sites now. There's sensors within finished buildings. There's the Internet of Things. So we've got more access to data to be able to create these models with. There's also the fact that I think we need to realize that even before we had this AI hype cycle, we have got a skills gap in the industry. So, that's a real driver, the fact that we can help alleviate some of those skills concerns by using AI. And then another driver, I guess, is about health and safety. If AI can save even just one life on a building site, then it's worth implementing. But I think it can go a lot further with the use of like the camera footage around sites to identify unsafe conditions and activities. That can have a real impact on saving lives. But when it comes to the barriers, I mean, they are still there and they shouldn't be overlooked. I mean, there's things like the security concerns that a lot of people have seen as a potential barrier, and you raised, Andrew. But then you've got things like the fact that we're quite a fragmented industry. So it's how do you implement some of these tools? It's all well and good implementing it in one part of the industry, but really to make it work, it needs to go through the whole cycle and the whole kind of chain, as it were. And then you've got things like the regulations, the building regulations and the codes, even things like NRM, sometimes they will lag behind the technology. So how do we ensure that we're agile enough to make sure that the codes and the regulations that we produce in industry are agile enough to keep up with this technology? Otherwise, it will become a barrier. People will say, well, it doesn't comply with such and such code, therefore I won't use it. But I guess the biggest barrier for me, Andrew, is around data skills and data literacy. And there's still a belief within our industry, and I have to say it's not just our industry, other industries are exactly the same from what I've experienced, is that data and data literacy skills are not something for us to do. It's something for the nerds and the geeks to do in the IT room. And it's absolutely not. It's a key core skill that I think we should all embrace to be able to get the most out of these tools, so that we can really understand the outputs of the data. Going back to my point before, not just believing the data, but utilizing the outputs of those data to make sound judgments on project delivery. So, to get over that barrier, the one thing I would sort of urge people to do is embrace data literacy skills and understand this is part of your job now, I think.
Thanks, James. We've had a question from the floor, actually, before I move on to the next planned question, which was, and the question is, can you give some examples of scheduling and costing tools which use AI? And certainly I'll ask each of you to give your view on this, but I've got one instance I know of with a US firm that's actually helping with HS2 in the UK, where they're using pretty deep artificial intelligence at scheduling both, pre-construction and during construction phase as well, to look at the various permutations and of plant machinery and team size and the order in which you do things. So there's AI that I already know being used very, very heavily in that scheduling issue, particularly with these large complex infrastructure projects. I mean, staying with you, James, can you give some examples of AI being used in costing or scheduling?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's software, some spring to mind. There's Nodes and Link that help with scheduling and risk, and Nplan, who are now heavily invested in by Google or Alphabet, Google's parent company. But even if you look at things like Autodesk, what's also happening is you've got the startups, but then you've also got the established companies, the Autodesk of this world, building AI into their software. So Autodesk 360 building in that kind of cost prediction and scheduling capabilities. But they're literally popping up. I mean, almost daily. I was at Digital Construction Week this year, and it's just amazing to see how many firms are there. And there'll be this expansion, and then I guess there'll be this contraction as some of the big companies start acquiring some of the smaller companies. But I think a lot of companies also doing it in-house. I mean, ourselves at Gleeds, we've got cost prediction. We're using sort of technology to create cost prediction algorithms to help our own surveyors in-house. So yeah, it's becoming more and more prevalent, I think.
Thanks, James. Pierpaolo, how do you answer that in terms of giving examples of scheduling or costing tools that are using AI?
Yeah, of course. Well, we're not advertising too much. Glodon's platform is fully AI powered as an end-to-end process. So it's embedded, including the QTO and the planning and the health and safety, as James was mentioned, that worth saving one life worth the whole investment and adoption. I concur in that. I mean, I've seen, especially in China, that the adoption is very much advanced. We have many sites that adopt in smart site technology or intelligence construction site, whatever you want to define, where there is a combination of IoT, AI box or AI powered algorithms and data, big data, that, of course, with sensors and cameras that can manage and give risk alarm and set parameters as far as allowance of people in some areas that can become at risk or are at risk because there are hazardous items and substance there, detection of fumes in an intelligent way, not just a simple detection of fumes that can be done by many smart cameras, and then of course discovery of pattern. And support the decision-making process when it comes to scheduling, and as well as if you want to do a parallel with the QSs when it comes to do a cost estimation and cost planning, but as well as cash flow forecast for a whole life cycle. Despite sometimes there is still a lack of data or availability is limited to be powered by AI, I do suppose that sooner we will bring into also the carbon management into the equation, because there are much more parameters there, including the transport and including but not limited embodied and operational carbon that need by default not to be linked to a specific project, even if in that case it is for that specific project, but need to benefit from a wider analysis of data. Worth to mention that over and beyond these things, artificial intelligence can be useful also for, education purpose. We have, for example, we have a construction education platform that we have built and is in use in many universities that on top of has been developed on top of ChatGPT and is an EAC ChatGPT that helped the students build their progress and knowledge into the construction environment. So there is really a wide use in this part of the world is pretty advanced, I have to say. Then, as James said, maybe there are in other countries there are, or in UK in particular, that there are limits with the usage of cameras, or there is some people might think that is for a controlling purpose rather than a risk preventing purpose, or there is in region of privacy, and that's clearly some things that organizations need to be taken into account.
Indeed, thanks. Just conscious of moving on time to the next question. Staying with you, Pierpaolo, a really interesting area, and I think we touched on it slightly earlier, James, when we were talking about AI and the role of the human being. But what's your view, Pierpaolo, about where the human sits in the AI loop? Because there's obviously not just in the construction sector, but this broader issue of where human beings are involved in the AI process, and it shouldn't be that necessarily the human being interrupts AI and puts bias back in, for example, in situations where the AI does a very good job of taking bias out. But back to that theme of professional skepticism and judgment, how do you see that relationship between practitioners in the sector and the AI that is increasingly supporting their decision making and their data inputs?
I do believe that there is different grade of applicability and also reliability of what AI-powered algorithm can give. There is still a discretionary that need to be left to the human to some extent, because I can give you an example. Again, I give you a practical example. We have one of the tools that we apply is for counting rebar on the site. It's pretty reliable. Doesn't need any human input, if not pointing a phone or to a camera or a phone camera to a bunch of rebars and automatically count, divide, and send the documents to the CDE or to the recipient of the document. That doesn't need, is proven, is work, is pretty much error-free, so you don't need any human interaction with that, if not in the camera. But otherwise, if you use AI algorithm, for example, to do a cost benchmark, when we have to do a cost estimation, that can give you a power of analyzing and pattern and data that maybe human being cannot be so easily. But then the ultimate decision stays in the professionals, that who has to take the support that AI gives you as a supporting tool, but ultimately the decision stays into the profession that need to add or take out from what has been given from the software in this particular case. Otherwise, everything should be, is going to be everything automated, and we take out everything. But we can also discover optimization pattern for doing inspection in big building, and this is difficult to find as a pattern as a human being. And then you can test, you can prove. Once it's proven and it's very solid, you don't need to have any other interaction. So in that case, there are intrinsic optimization that AI can offer.
Indeed. Lovely. What are your thoughts on that? And particularly, obviously, given your perspective from academia, what's your sort of view on this really important question about this relationship between the human beings and the practitioners and AI?
Yes. There is always that fear of once you've got certain tools, then you don't need actually human input. Like James earlier mentioned, AI is highly dependent on humans to establish both input and output parameters. So there has to be the role of the practitioners looking through the data or the scenarios or outputs that have come out from some of the AI generated information and making decisions based on that. Anything that's been input for the AI to analyze, it still has to be clearly stated out and mapped out by logic based on what practitioners are seeing currently in practice, what they intend or the predictions of where we're going to. So those are some of the information that can sink in the using of those tools. So yes, we will get to a point where possibly these tools can run on their own, but there is still a lot of dependence on human input as to what we want those tools to determine. These are tools, like James highlighted, these are tools. They improve how we process, they improve how we practice, and it shouldn't be solely dependent on without our own judgment as practitioners to see how that happens. And that's the same thing when we come within education and with learning. It's not necessarily about how we're using these tools, but about what we need these tools to do and why we need them. It's about the rationale, and that's one thing that academia it's really emphasizing on. We've got these tools, but we need to learn the skills. We need to understand how to use them. In what scenarios are they applicable? In what scenarios would they optimize our outputs? And those are the kind of things that academia needs to kind of drive, be in the front of the line, driving why and how and in what way should we use these tools to drive and optimize outputs within construction practices.
Thanks, lovely. And James, quickly coming to you, given that once again I'll use that phrase at the sharp end, what sort of governance and advice are you sort of developing to make sure that there's that balance is achieved of automation on the one hand, but professional skepticism, judgment, and arguably sense of liability about decisions that are being then made for clients, for example?
Well, you have to do it at two ends. You've got the education piece, as Loveland talks about, just educating people about it, and then you have to apply some policies as well, which we've done in terms of what's acceptable use and what's not. And it's quite hard actually when you sit down to work out what you should and shouldn't do. In terms of using AI, and of course it's changing so quickly that these AI policies need to be kept up to date. I mean, the worst thing you can do, I did hear of some companies who are like trying to shut down using certain things like ChatGPT, which is, I don't know how you police that for a start, but even then I think it's a mistake, because we should embrace it. This is a technology that can help us. After all, we don't perform particularly well as an industry, and we've got to improve, and this is something that can help us. The best analogy I can use is if you think of everyone's heard of these supercomputers that try and predict the football Premier League table or whatever league you look at. Now, they always get it wrong, right? They always get it. They never get it 100% right, but they usually probably get right who the top four is. They probably get right who who's going to be relegated are, and they get the kind of gist right, but maybe not the final order. And that's the way I kind of say with project deliveries. Project delivery is very complicated, so it might not give you the absolute answer, but it'll give you some guidance, and then you need to lay on top of that the human, what I call the domain expertise, whether that's quantity surveying, whether that's project management, your own domain expertise, to put that layer on top to sense check it and validate it before you present it to clients.
Indeed, no, what wise advice. Back to you, Loveland, if I may, and I think a critical piece here in terms of generating value from data and technology, because obviously data and tech is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. How do you see AI and various digital tools helping in this critical net zero reduction in carbon emissions in built assets? How's that going to help and really deliver, which is what's such a critical imperative for the sector?
Yes, AI can support a lot around energy management systems using sensors. There is a lot of, say, for example, energy used within the construction sector, whether when we're building or when we're using facilities. And having, for example, digital twins of existing constructed facilities can help to monitor the extent of carbon in usage. This is, of course, we can prevent it starting from design or reduce it. But while it's being used, digital twin can give us a lot of information. If it's AI-powered tool that enables us to understand the extent of carbon usage within facilities, how that can be predicted in the next 5 years, depending on how operations are actually happening within their facilities and what way to minimize it. So there can be energy management tracking, which is also important. There is also the aspect of supply chain as well. So optimizing transportation routes can help a lot. When it's AI powered, there is the scenarios that can be predicted as to which transport route is mostly applicable or most efficient to reduce carbon within the atmosphere. And that's also, there's also the aspect of suggesting alternative materials that can be used, which is linked with circular economy as well. What can be reused, what can be recycled, what can be recovered, and AI can support, using those AI tools can support empowering how we get information and how we work with those information to integrate circularity and sustainability within the construction usage process as well. So yes, AI, there's a lot of benefit around it. There is carbon tracking, there is predicted analysis, there is understanding future carbon emissions, starting from design based on selection of materials or design of products, and then during usage. So there is more around what AI can give to us in terms of benefits as to reducing carbons as well.
Thanks, lovely. Pier Paolo, this is obviously a hugely important question, and obviously a complex one when we think of, in simple terms, embodied and operational carbon, but obviously scope 1, 2, and 3 through the whole life cycle. What's your perspective on this huge challenge, but obviously huge opportunity to use data and tech?
Well, it comes back on, in my view, the AI is just a piece of this digital toolbox that organization are going to use, and gives an edge. It gives the edge of computational power together with edge computing, and it gives the ability to go in a quicker decision maker, gives the ability to discover pattern and save many times, and taking better decision. So it reduces the carbon emission. Is okay, we can calculate better embodied carbon and operational carbon, but if we think about that we can work better on the site, avoid with software, for example, that help us in reduce clashes. We have a very good clash detection software, and maybe in this case it's not necessarily even that is AI powered. We reduce the amount of rebuilt, we reduce the amount of material that we use, whatever they are, and we reduce the carbon footprint in the case. If we, as I mentioned before, smart site, imagine that with a smart site and IoT devices and camera, you actively control pollutant and dust. You reduce environmental impact at the same time, and you optimize your waste as a whole. I believe that the artificial intelligence gives the edge to this process, gives a better substantial and solid results, but is part of what the digitalization process is aimed to contribute when it comes to reducing carbon emission and build a better built environment that we have to be living. Yeah.
Thanks, Paolo. James, can I bring you on this and get your perspective as well on this specific thing around carbon emissions?
Yeah, I think the important, so AI, as Paolo said, it's a tool, and it's a buzzword at the moment, but it is just another tool. So it's not always the answer, right? Sometimes the answer is using digital tools to solve problems up front. And I think when it comes to carbon emissions, the best place that you can help to bring down the carbon emissions is at the early stages of design, and using things like generative design, mainly for the designers, to look at lots of different models, lots of different geometry, to make sure that you're simulating the energy use at that early stage, you're simulating the building materials that you're using at that early stage. Because in my experience, the decisions that you make at that kind of REBA stage 0 or 1, they're very hard to reverse once you get sort of stage 4. So the edge that AI can give is, whereas before you probably didn't know, you couldn't kind of simulate that many scenarios, and you'd get to stage 4 or whatever, and you'd realize, oh, this is not maybe the most efficient way, but it's too late to go back. That's what AI gives us now, the ability to do loads of simulations and at an early stage make sure we're going down the right route. And that's the bit I'm quite excited about.
And I suppose that's another interesting example of, I think it's how you described it, that AI will probably give you a number of options, but there's still going to be that professional judgment given some of the trade-offs, given some of the cost constraints, given the sponsor's requirements, that it may not give you the final answer, but it'll give you a set of options that a professional can then turn into the final answer.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why when people say, oh, AI is going to take our jobs, and get that fear, I said, no, it's embrace it, because it's a tool. It's going to make you more powerful. Imagine being able to go and speak to your client and give them all those options. They don't care that it's been generated by AI. They just think that you've got a number of options and you're presenting to them a recommendation for the best one. So I look at it in that positive light.
Staying with you actually, and moving to the kind of broader agenda of not just net zero and carbon emissions, but the whole kind of push for sustainability across the built environment, and indeed making project delivery more efficient and cost effective. How do you see, once again, digital tools, AI, improving that broader agenda? Because clearly carbon emissions are critical, but there is this broader agenda now about overall sustainability and indeed just improving the efficiency of delivery of construction projects.
Yeah, and actually, I was speaking to somebody a couple of days ago about this. I think there's a really important point we got to sort of preface this with, is that the processing power required for AI is a barrier in the first instance, and we shouldn't underestimate that. So, you know, the energy consumption required to train these AI models requires a huge amount of computing power, a huge amount of electricity. You've got the data center pollution. You know, you've got kind of the negative impacts of AI in the first instance. To get there, you've got job losses, you've got bias and unfairness, but you know, main thing is the amount of energy and everything that goes into powering this. Now, so you kind of start already by saying, well, AI is having a negative effect on sustainability in the widest sense, but that's okay, I suppose, if you kind of get this delicate balance and you say, well, that's going to enable us to create far more positive implications down the line. And it's that balance, isn't it, between innovation and the kind of ethical considerations. There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, actually, I think last week, talking about how companies are using AI to cut emissions in building. So I think the main message, it goes back to what we were saying before, is we're not going to save the planet with software, but it's an interesting part of the puzzle. But in terms of like, okay, so we're going to take a bit of a hit on the sustainability agenda because we're using AI, but then if we can use that to optimize energy production, if we can use it to improve predictive maintenance by use of sensors, if we can use it to make sure that we're looking at things like demand forecasting for energy, and then all of a sudden it starts offsetting that hit we've taken on the sustainability, and then starts massively becoming a benefit. And you know, Pierpaolo was talking about sort of smart cities using digital twins and bringing that all into the equation. So all of a sudden AI starts enabling you to optimize your design, to automate some of the construction, using that predictive maintenance, making sure we're reducing waste, and then it's worth it. Then it's worth this kind of current hit we're taking with the data center pollution, because it's going to have in the medium term and long term a massive positive impact on sustainability. But I don't think my point is, I don't think we should underestimate the fact that there is a hit we're taking at the moment with using AI.
Yeah, like you, I read an interesting article, I think it might have been The Economist, with the chip manufacturers, I think, being very, very conscious now of their role in reducing this energy consumption, because I did see a statistic that said it was probably going to be, you know, the consumption of what they now call compute, which is, you know, cloud and AI, is going to be around 4% of emissions per year. You know, it's the size of the UK in terms of emissions, so it's a country in its own right. And obviously there were similar concerns over Bitcoin mining and similar kind of energy usage. But on the positive point, as you say, there's a lot that we can get out of the technology, and the chip manufacturers, I think, are very, very mindful. They've got to look at energy consumption from their perspective. And indeed, as you know, data centers are being built in Scandinavia near hydroelectric, and you know, use the sort of ambient cooling as well. But it's, as you say, it's an issue we must remember that data and technology is not cost free in that way. I mean, I'd like to almost kind of wrap up now with a question for all of you, actually, as a kind of a summary, a 2 or 3 minute summary from all of you around you know, the question of, you know, how you think AI and digital tools will change the way we build in the future, and what does the next 2 to 3, 5, 10 years look at in terms of advances? And obviously it's very hard to exactly predict what the next wave of AI and technology would be, but perhaps starting with you, Lovely, how do you see that the next 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years, and what we could be doing differently over that time period?
If we start first with the next 2 years, it's about training. It's about getting to grips on how and why we need to use it. The part of upskilling, learning, the educational environment needs to do a lot by collaborating more with practitioners, industry, who are also in the process of pioneering the use of AI. So the next 2 years, I believe we're looking more into upskilling knowledge on why we need to use this, how best to use it, and in what scenarios do we need that. Then we begin to flow into increasing the next 5 years. I'm seeing more of integration of AI and other digital technologies beyond the current use of just for example, in QS and just estimating is wide beyond that. We begin to use more of that, embracing it, using for visualization purposes, project planning, particularly strongly in the area of planning and designing. There will be a lot more embracing the use of AI to simulate scenarios. Generative designs is quite important because we're trying to reduce carbon, we're trying to optimize process. There is a need to avoid as much as possible and mitigate risks. There's health and safety concerns. There are issues around circularity and sustainability objectives that need to be met. So there will be a lot embracing to virtually understand how we can undertake facilities, maintenance, how we can build, how we can deconstruct, how we can reuse components for later purposes are some of the things that we begin to use more of AI and digital technologies to enhance. So I'm seeing between the next 5 years, there will be a lot of usage around the pre-construction aspect. There'll be more embracing of AI tools and other digital tools. And then say the next 5 to 10 years, there will be so much around implementing it full scale across projects, just like we have seen BIM being used in compared to what it was in the past 9 years to where it is now. I see more embrace around AI and other digital technologies being expanded beyond just design, which currently is what pioneers the most at the moment, to a full life cycle of projects and facilities. So
thanks, Lovely. Pipala, your final thoughts.
I can tell what I envisage or what I would like to be happening. That is a very less silo approach that will enable a collaborative project management from the early stage to the delivery and the operation. James was alluding before that difference in carbon, for example, can happen when it is well designed and simulated, and it happens in early stage. So I believe that a platform type of approach that goes over and beyond what is just adopted now, that is a CDE type of approach, platform-wise, that gives more edge on the document management and put everyone on the same page, will be increased at PaaS level, so at the level of real microservice that the platform can give, and enabling as I said, a collaborative approach from the various stages. So from the pre-design, the design, the supply management, the all construction phases, the handovering, with enabling digital twin technology to be in place and facilitate a better operation. With systems that are open, so are not on one or two dominant player, but give the possibility to interact to the best in class in any of each stages. That means a fully digitalization of the compound, and it's a big journey. It takes time, but if we don't dismount the silo approach that is still plaguing, in my view, the construction industry, we will not achieve the results that we want to all to have.
Thanks, Pier Paolo. And James, a final 30, 40, 50 seconds from you.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I think sort of like in the near future, it's just going to be, as Lovely said, more training, more realization, more kind of using it to become more efficient and productive. I think longer term, we're at crossroads, and taking Pier Paolo's view, you know, we can either embrace this, break down the silo mentality and keep control of our own industry and utilize this tool to make us all better, or we start giving away a lot of our clout to the big software companies that will come in and sort of disrupt us. And I hope, like, really kind of passionately hope that we do the former one and we can work together to keep control of our own industry.
I think that's a really key point. You know, we are the domain experts. Let's embrace this technology and make it work for us and our clients. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. James, Lovelin, Pier Paolo, thanks ever so much for your time. Just a reminder to those listening and viewing that we'll publish a recording and a written summary of this webinar online. And do please feel free to share those with your professional networks. Please do take a few moments to let us know what you thought of today's sessions by completing the online poll, and that will appear on your screens at the end of the webinar. There's obviously going to be future webinars and conferences, and recordings of previous webinars are also available online. We also have our podcast series, so please do take a look at that. Have a listen and tell us what you think. You can follow us, WebF, on X, what formerly used to be called Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn, and you can receive news of upcoming webinars and catch up on any that you have missed. But until the next time, goodbye. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.